Imagine a woman everyone seems to know and almost no one truly knows at all. Her face is on magazine covers. Her outline is plastered across bedroom walls. Her slow-motion run along a beach has become part of television history. And yet, what usually follows her name are jokes, eye-rolling, and the sense that we are dealing not with a person, but with a walking cliché. For some, she is an icon of a particular decade. For others, she is little more than a punchline. We are, of course, talking about Pamela Anderson. But to tell her story properly, I want to begin in the late 18th century. 2 full centuries before Baywatch and glossy magazines, Europe had another woman whose appearance became a legend of its own. She sat for the great portraitists of her day. Aristocratic salons whispered her name. She shone at court, moved among kings and admirals. Her name was Emma Hamilton. 200 years, different continents, completely different technologies separate them. And yet, if we temporarily ignore the changes in fashion and screen resolution, their lives start to look disturbingly alike. In both cases, we see a girl from nowhere, from a world with no guarantees and no safety net, whom society selects and turns into an embodied fantasy, carefully constructed, rehearsed, and profitably sold. Around her body, an entire myth, a career, and an industry are built. And at a certain point, that myth begins to live on its own, detached from the person for whom it was once the only way out of poverty. In this video, I want to look at Pamela Anderson through the eyes of a historian, someone used to memoirs, oil portraits, and political intrigues of the 18th and 19th centuries. And at the same time, I want to look at Emma Hamilton with the eyes of a 21st century observer who understands the entertainment industry, information warfare, and modern scandal. I am going to avoid the blunt vocabulary we usually use for commodified desire, but that is exactly what we will be talking about. How the human body becomes capital, how physical longing gets dressed up in velvet and film stock, and how expensive such arrangements turn out to be. This is not a tale of sin in the Sunday school sense, and not a sermon. It is an attempt to understand why we so readily deify exposed beauty, and just as readily enjoy watching the fall of those we placed on the pedestal. And we begin with a woman almost everyone who owned a television in the 1990s can picture instantly: Pamela Anderson. Only this time, let us try to see not just the poster, but the human being on the other side of the gloss. If you ask someone who grew up in the 1990s who Pamela Anderson is, the answer is almost automatic: that lifeguard on the beach. The red swimsuit, the waves, the slow-motion shots, this is a visual shorthand for an entire decade. But before she became the worldwide emblem of beach fantasy, Pamela was in essence just another spectator in the stands. And that supposedly random moment in the crowd explains a great deal about how the modern desire industry actually works. Her story does not begin with an audition or a Hollywood agent. It begins with a football game in Canada. She is sitting in the stands among thousands of others, not doing anything particularly noteworthy. Then the stadium camera finds her. Her face and figure appear on the giant screen, and the crowd reacts. Applause, whistles, a wave of attention moving through the seats. What a casual viewer would call a lucky shot instantly looks very different to people whose business is to monetize attractiveness. They see exactly what they need: first-class raw material. Soon, Pamela is invited to work as a model. A men's magazine, long specialized in presenting the female body as a consumable spectacle, offers her a spread.
And that is how her ascent begins, from anonymous fan in the stands to a figure recognized across continents. At this stage, Pamela controls very little. She has her looks, her natural physical ease, a recognizable type, part girl next door, part meticulously accentuated allure. Everything else is done for her by editors, photographers, stylists, and marketing teams. The magazine format she enters is not just about ink and paper. It's a thoroughly industrial machine designed to mass-produce fantasies. Every layout, every pose, every angle is calculated. How the light should fall, what lines and curves to emphasize and which to conceal, what emotion the typical viewer should read, playful innocence, suggestion, challenge. Where the reader thinks he sees natural beauty, an entire crew is at work, tasked with dosing suggestion so that it stays just within the bounds of what can be sold everywhere and yet is never bland. At that point, Pamela is less a private person and more a persona. She is adjusted to a particular visual standard. The hair, the makeup, the framing, the expressions, all subordinated to one goal: to create an image that seizes the eye and refuses to relinquish it. Here, the parallel with the 18th century is quite direct. Back then, a portrait painter would position his sitter and drapery so that a strip of fabric accidentally slipped from a shoulder in just the right way. Of course, this was no accident, but design.
The only difference is speed. Oil and canvas might require months, whereas in the late 20th century, you can achieve the same effect in a day's shoot and a few hours in the darkroom. After her first shoots, Pamela is no longer just a model, she is a cover girl. And if you look at how the magazine markets her, the message is clear. The image takes up the page. The name is almost incidental. In the public imagination, she solidifies into a bundle of visual traits: a particular outline, blonde hair, a certain kind of narrowed gaze, specific poses in beachwear. Her backstory, her character, her tastes, none of that matters yet. This is the same mechanism that governed aristocratic portraiture. Reduce a person to a cluster of signs that can be reproduced endlessly. In the late 18th century, those might be pale skin, a narrow waist, elaborate hair, a fan. In the late 20th, the vocabulary is not so different, only the proportions and fabrics change. Once the image escapes into the marketplace, it gains a life of its own. It appears on posters, t-shirts, pirate video covers. It detaches from the original context, that specific issue of that particular magazine, and becomes a free-floating symbol, ready to be dropped into adverts, jokes, daydreams. By this point, Pamela the person is almost completely dissolved into Pamela the image, which is why, even now, most people who can picture her in an instant struggle to name a single concrete detail of her life. The next phase is television. Baywatch was conceived as a lightweight series about lifeguards, but it quickly became a global pop culture phenomenon. On paper, there is a plot. People get into danger in the water, the lifeguards rescue them, characters have personal dramas, romances, arguments. But if you watch what is foregrounded in the opening credits, the trailers and the promotional stills, the center of gravity is obvious. It is not the rescue. It is the body in motion. The slow-motion run along the shoreline became a kind of secular liturgy. The camera lingers on every step, every gesture, every line, stretching an instant into an independent scene. This is not merely beauty, but a ritualized visual hymn to one highly specific ideal. Viewers expect it in almost every episode. Producers know those seconds are what sell the show. Advertisers know precisely what kind of concentrated attention they are buying. Pamela, in that role, becomes an emblem in the strictest sense of the word. No longer a fully fledged character with psychological detail, but a moving icon. If we compare this to the 18th and 19th centuries, the analogy writes itself.
a portrait of Emma Hamilton hanging in a London drawing room, drawing half-covert looks from guests, and a 1990s television set where Pamela appears every evening. In both cases, the viewer is invited not so much to engage with a personality as to contemplate a deliberately displayed body framed for safe viewing, by wood and gilt, or by glass and cathode rays. By now, we can ask, what does Pamela herself say about all this? In the early years, almost nothing. The world she has entered is built on the assumption that she is there to appear, not to speak. Her voice is heard rarely, and then mostly as an accessory to the image. Interviews are structured to reinforce the persona. Light jokes, predictable questions, more of the same. In this, her fate closely resembles that of many celebrated women at earlier courts. Their personal selves dissolve into anecdotes and into what men choose to record about them. Painters' captions, poets' verses, diarists' asides. They become legends before they are allowed to become authors. That pattern will become brutally clear a little later, when a recording meant solely for private use is stolen and sold, and millions of strangers behave as though they have an unquestionable right to scrutinize the most intimate fragments of her life. We shall come back to that. For now, what matters is this. By the time Pamela Anderson's name is widely known, she has already undergone the standard modern transformation from person into symbol. Her fears, her intelligence, the complexities of her private life, the audience does not ask about these. It is satisfied with the shorthand, blonde hair, the beach, the slow-motion run, and the cluster of implications that polite language rarely articulates aloud. At this point, we can step back 2 centuries into a world of candles, oil paint, and court etiquette to Emma Hamilton, who lived through an eerily similar story.
We are in the late 18th century. The British Empire is expanding. Money and gossip flow through London, Naples, Paris. High society is easily bored and always hungry for new fascinations. Emma is not born into palaces, but into the world that serves them. Her origins are modest. She has neither dowry nor a family name that opens doors. For a girl like that, the default script is simple. A life between kitchens, washrooms, and a cramped room under the eaves. In a society where a woman has virtually no independent economic instruments, her appearance and charisma become nearly her only negotiable assets. Girls like Emma do not usually get their own biographies. They flicker at the edges of other people's memoirs. A charming maid, a delightful young companion. Their personal history begins only when someone with money and status suddenly decides they're exceptional. At some point, Emma finds herself among such men. Officers, aristocrats, patrons of the arts. People who see in her not just another pretty face, but a volatile mix of youth, expressiveness, and vitality that can be harnessed. In the 18th century, harnessed generally meant making a young woman into an adornment to one's house and table, a presence that animates a gathering, a focus of attention that burnishes the host's own reputation. It is a delicate balance. A single malicious phrase can push her into the category of tainted, but if those same men call her a muse and speak of her with admiration, doors begin to open. The pivotal figure in this opening is the painter George Romney. Already well known, he specializes in portraiture, in transforming human faces into flattering images for posterity. When Emma arrives in his studio as a model, he is, quite simply, fascinated. He sees not just an attractive sitter, but an embodiment of several fantasies at once. He paints her again and again. On his canvases, she is no longer a servant on the economic brink, but something almost mythic, a classical goddess, a romantic heroine, a pastoral beauty, a teasing nymph. Study these portraits. The drapery barely covering her shoulders, the eyes that look somewhere just beyond the viewer, the posture hovering between innocent spontaneity and very conscious allure.
The viewer is given the feeling of having been granted a glimpse of something private, though nothing overt is actually shown. The finished painting hangs respectably in a gentleman's parlor, labeled as the portrait of a lady, but every adult knows why it is really there. Romney is doing with Emma what 2 centuries later magazines and television will do with Pamela. He turns a living woman into a visual archetype of desire. So effective an archetype that the messy details of her actual life recede. Is Emma directing this? To a limited extent. She understands that her looks are an opportunity. She learns how to hold herself, how to present her face to the light. But the crucial choices are all made by men. Who sees her images? In what costume? With what accompanying stories? Her own voice scarcely appears in the record. We know her from other people's letters and diaries, awed, envious, censorious. Rumors gather around her. Her patrons, the power she is thought to exert over them, her supposedly unconventional behavior, all are dissected at length. Some paint her as an angel, others as a danger. Society consumes her image with appetite, yet is oddly reluctant to admit how dependent its own pleasures are on women of precisely this sort. Romney's portraits become for Emma what magazines and TV spots will be for Pamela. They make her instantly recognizable within her milieu. A visitor in a house where one of these paintings hangs is told, "That is my acquaintance, Miss Emma," and the rest of the sentence does not need to be spoken. Invitations follow. Dinners, salons, gatherings at that ambiguous intersection of art, flirtation, and politics. There, Emma is no longer just a model, but a person to watch, to talk about, to orbit. And yet her status rests on a single foundation: her physical presence and her mastery of ambiguity. She has no birth, no dowry, no established place. She stands on a ledge. A single misstep and she falls into the shadowlands of compromised women. If she moves carefully enough, a more formal integration into high society is conceivable. That integration arrives in the form of Sir William Hamilton, the British envoy to the court of Naples. By the time Emma marries Hamilton, he is an experienced diplomat and a distinguished collector of antiquities. She is poised between the sphere of artists and that of respectable society. Their union is not devoid of feeling, but it is also a contract. He gains a striking hostess, capable of captivating and disarming his guests, turning his residence into the most talked-about house in Naples. She gains a name, social legitimacy, and a significant degree of protection. Naples at the end of the 18th century is turbulent. Royal pomp alongside squalor, Spanish dynastic politics, provincial conservatism, revolutionary rumors from France. The Hamiltons' home becomes a kind of semi-official theater. Formally, it is the British Embassy. Informally, it is a salon in which diplomacy, art, and a carefully staged atmosphere of heightened feeling are inseparable. Emma is the central figure on this stage. She greets and entertains guests, sings, recites, and above all, performs her celebrated attitudes, a series of poses in lightweight classical drapery arranged by candlelight and moonlight, in which she becomes by turns a tragic heroine, a grieving mother, a seductress, a supplicant. Outwardly, everything remains within the bounds of propriety. No explicit transgression, no verbal indecorum. Yet the combination of shadow, gesture, and cloth creates an unmistakable sense of having approached the threshold of what should not quite be seen. Visitors write about these evenings in their journals with a mixture of embarrassment and delight. They are unsure whether to describe what they saw as art, performance, or something far less abstract. In effect, the Hamiltons' residence offers what we might now call a high cultural event with a distinctly adult undercurrent. The only differences are technological. Candles instead of stage lighting, eyewitnesses instead of cameras. Emma, however, is not just decoration. Over time, she becomes a kind of informal intermediary. Naples is not London. Here, as often as not, political positions are shaped and reshaped not at a council table, but over long dinners and intimate evening conversations. Queen Maria Carolina, the king's wife, is known to be forceful and politically engaged. Emma, with her talent for making people feel understood and appreciated, becomes a close companion to the Queen. For British interests, this is an extraordinary stroke of luck. Through the conversations of these two women run exactly those shades of opinion and inclination which no official dispatch can entirely capture. On the surface, this is friendship and feminine influence. In substance, it functions as a quiet yet real lever of diplomacy. All the while, Emma's position remains precarious. Her past is an open secret. Her present is tethered to her husband and to the empire he serves. The basis of her social power is still essentially spectacle. At the very peak of this Neapolitan success, another figure arrives who will bind her name to his in history, and at the same time hasten her fall. Admiral Horatio Nelson.
Nelson comes to Naples already famous. He carries not only honors and victories, but also grievous wounds and failing health, exactly the combination from which a romantic cult of the war hero is fashioned. He is received at the Hamiltons as a guest of the highest importance. There, for the first time, he encounters Emma not as a studio subject or a rumor, but as a living, speaking presence. Their relationship develops in circumstances almost tailor-made for intimacy. Dinners, music, moonlit terraces, the half-light of rooms where formal talk effortlessly turns into personal confession. Emma's gifts are particularly potent in such settings. She is able to listen in a way that grants meaning to every anecdote, speak in a way that makes even hardened officers feel seen and singular, and move in a way that leaves no doubt about where the emotional spotlight rests. For a man long immersed in the hierarchies of the Navy and the rigors of campaign life, this combination can only be intoxicating. Their closeness does not unfold in secrecy. It develops under Hamilton's roof. The three of them, the diplomat, his wife, and the admiral, travel and live together so conspicuously that the pretense of innocence becomes very hard to maintain. In letters of the time, people speak of extraordinary friendship and uncommon attachment. Everyone understands what is meant. The Hamilton's household becomes a sort of living legend. The elder statesman, his dazzling wife, the maimed avenger of the Nile. To some, an edifying tableau of unity. To others, a convenient opportunity for moral superiority. Nelson and Emma's names are fused in the public mind. For many of their contemporaries, she comes to embody that refined, sensuous, almost decadent civilization which the British fleet is imagined to defend. Artists, caricaturists, memoir writers all reinforce this impression. The one-armed admiral and the woman at his side look, in retrospect, almost like figures from an allegorical frieze. The difficulty is that Emma is not an allegory. She is a human being with her own hopes. It is not hard to imagine what she might have expected from this union. That if a national hero so openly depends on her, writes about her, lives with her, then when he is gone, the country will somehow recognize her place in the story. Nelson does attempt to secure something for her in words. In letters and in his will, he speaks of her devotion, asks that she and their child be looked after. But the machinery of state and respectable opinion has other priorities. It prefers its heroes simplified, brave, wounded, gloriously dead, unencumbered by domestic irregularities.
When Nelson is killed at Trafalgar, his image is cast in bronze and raised on columns. Emma is left with a daughter, a mountain of debts, and a reputation difficult to monetize. The house, the gowns, the elaborate hospitality, the traveling, all of it cost money. While the ambassador and the admiral lived, their status absorbed much of this. Without them, the arithmetic lands squarely on her shoulders. Creditors become more insistent. Those who once flocked to her evenings discover a sudden shyness about being associated with her. Her name still appears in correspondence, but increasingly as a warning, a story about what comes of relying too heavily on one's charms, smoothed over with a thin layer of condescending pity. Emma tries to stave off the inevitable. She moves, hides from lawsuits, searches for remnants of the old network that might come to her aid. Each year the rooms grow smaller, the fabrics coarser, the voices around her rougher. She dies abroad, in poverty, in a silence she is wholly unaccustomed to. The woman who once stood literally at the center of candlelit circles of admirers now leaves the stage with scarcely a murmur. Her trajectory lays bare how easily a society erases a woman from its serious memory once the qualities that made her irresistible no longer serve anyone's ambitions. Now let us return to Pamela. Her later years will look very different. She will stand on a Broadway stage, publish a memoir, sit in front of a documentary camera, and narrate her life in her own voice. But the underlying pattern is uncomfortably similar. The world that turned her into a symbol was for a long time strangely unwilling to treat her as a person. In the 1990s, people discussed her with the same breezy cruelty with which courtiers and pamphleteers once dissected Emma. They analyzed her appearance, her partners, the scandals around her, as if all of this were a free public performance and not simply the private life of an individual. The one major difference is that Pamela was born to an era in which a woman can, at least in theory, reach for the microphone and say, "Now I will speak." She can appear without the familiar armor of her persona, without the heavy makeup and the scripted teasing, and deliver a monologue about what it means to be a fantasy for millions, and at the same time felt deeply lonely and humiliated. She can write a book in which she chooses the words, instead of waiting while others package her life into a convenient story. Emma had no such possibility. Her story does not belong to her. It is scattered across other people's letters, caricatures, sentimental vignettes. What she herself thought and felt, we can only reconstruct in fragments. She was never allowed to become the author of her life, only its subject. Set them side by side, young Emma in Romney's portraits and Pamela running along an artificial Malibu beach in slow motion. On the surface, the contrast is stark. Powdered hair versus peroxide blonde, oil paint versus videotape. Strip away the styling and the structure is essentially the same. First comes the gaze that says, "You are exceptional, you are not like the others." Then money attaches itself to that gaze. Patrons, publishers, producers, diplomats, and admirals. The woman becomes a surface onto which desires, ideals, and anxieties are projected. As long as she is young, compliant, and does not disturb the fantasy, she is celebrated and richly used. The moment age, fatigue, or simply a desire to assert herself enters the picture, the same world calmly turns toward the next image. Pamela has one crucial advantage over Emma. She lives at a time when the woman on the poster can, if she insists, become the narrator. She can stand before the lens and say, "Yes, you knew my body better than my name. Perhaps now you might try the opposite." Emma never had that opportunity. Her role was scripted in advance. First ornament, then temptation, then cautionary tale. All of it without the right to reply.
When we look at old portraits and satirical prints, it is easy to see only period charm, the dresses, the hairstyles, the galleries. But behind each such image, there is someone who once, very likely, wanted not only to be admired, but to be heard. In that sense, Pamela Anderson is not just a star of the 1990s, but a late inheritor of Emma Hamilton's fate. She has been given a chance her predecessor never had, to step down from the poster and attempt to tell her own version of the story. The only real question is whether we, the audience, are prepared to listen as attentively as we once watched. That's all from me for today. Thank you for your time and attention. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot of fascinating content ahead.